Hello, and welcome to the Puppet Playhouse Podcast, otherwise known as the PPP, or simply for short. My name is William Freeman, and this week we are going to talk about the art of theater. Now, I did briefly do some theater discussion in the pilot episode of this podcast, so if you haven't checked that out, do yourself a favor and give it a listen. And the reason why we want to talk about theater is because I am currently doing theater, specifically children's theater, with the play Charlotte's Web, based on the book by E.B. White. And I just think that it's good for us to talk about theater because maybe there's people out there listening that haven't done a lot of theater. Maybe you haven't been to a lot of theater. And you might want to go and do once you hear my podcast. So we're going to talk about it today because I'm heavily a theater on the brain because I'm doing a play. And when Charlotte's Web gets over, I'm also directing a play, The Case of Humanity versus Pontius Pilate. And that is a great show where we are putting the biblical character, Roman prefect Pontius Pilate, on trial for killing Jesus Christ. It's a courtroom trial set in the modern era where we are taking all these Bible characters from the past, bringing them here to the present, and we're going to let 12 people from the audience decide if Pilate should be found guilty for killing Jesus. I love it. Now then, the first thing we want to do is let's define theater. Now, you may say, well, duh, I know what theater is. But maybe there's someone that doesn't know, especially kids may not know. Because in children's theater, we are allowing kids to be bussed in from schools, elementary schools. And there are a lot of times when there are kids out there, that's their very first time ever in a theater, outside of, say, a movie theater. And they don't have a clue really what this is. So I like to define theater. And typically what I would do is go out before the play starts and I'll introduce myself and I'll give a basic definition. And this is what I would say. I would say that, well, all of you, and this is a theater, right? And you are what we call an audience. And as an audience, you are here to see actors in a play. Now, an actor is just basically a person who's pretending to be someone or something else. And a play, well, that's a lot like a show that you might see on TV or even online streaming through Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu, except that the actors you're going to see in the play are live and in person on stage versus on a screen. Now, that's a very overly simplistic definition of theater. However, I think it is perfect for telling young kids what theater is in a short and sweet manner. And maybe that's a good definition for some of you out there if you've never really experienced theater. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't, you need to go, okay? If there is a theater in your town or even close to your town, make an effort to go see a show. Now, I know that there's television, and there's all the online streams and everything, so you can stay home and totally be entertained. And there's movies at the theater, and there's bands playing in concerts and all of that. But with all of these entertainment opportunities, I still argue that theater is different and unique, and there's nothing like it. So you need to go experience it. Because you can say, well, I can watch this show and binge watch it on Netflix. Well, seeing actors live in the same room as you, it's a whole nother ballgame. It's a completely different feeling. So do yourself a favor and go see it. Because not only are you going to get some entertainment, but you're going to be supporting the local arts in your community or whatever community you have to go to. Now, I understand if there's no theater where you live or anywhere close to you. I get it. But if you're anywhere near a local theater, you need to go. And by local theater, what do I mean? Well, I mean community theater. And you say, well, okay, what is community theater? Well, community theater, as I would define it, is, well, a community-based theater. And it's interactive, and it's very collaborative, and it's going to rely 100% on the participation of the surrounding community where it is. So basically, community theater is live theater, where you go in and you watch a performance of a play. But it's not professional paid actors and singers like you're going to get if you go to Broadway. It is all amateur from the community. And that is amazing, because I've mentioned it in my pilot, how we have some amazing actors here where I live. Totally good enough, at least in my view, that I could see them on Broadway or in Hollywood, or I think Georgia is a good spot that television and streaming is filming a lot in around Atlanta. So I could easily see some of the actors here in this area being totally in the public eye and making real money doing theater. They just happen to be here, and they're not discovered yet. But you can discover them if you go see your own live theater in your own community. And you can support that, because theater's not cheap. And it's not easy to pull off. And the whole thing, it takes a village. Well, it does. Because not only do you got to have actors who are going to be in the show, but you're going to have a director who's going to oversee and make sure that everything happens and gets put together the right way. And then you've got to have people in charge of lights and sound and backstage people. And there's just so much involved. And last but not least, you got to have an audience. Because no matter how much effort everybody else puts in, if the audience isn't there to see it, it really doesn't matter. And community theater is there for you so that you can escape the real world, because we all know how much COVID sucks. We've been dealing with it over 2 years, and we're tired and ready for it to be over. And if you go see live theater, you can have a momentary escape from all of the COVID crazy. So, yeah, do that. Right? Of course. Now, why would you even want to be in theater? That's another question that people ask me. Well, I gave you reasons to go see theater, but why would you want to be in theater? Well, that's easy to answer, because theater is just what it is when you go see it. It's an escape for you. When you're in theater, you can escape the real world at rehearsal, because rehearsals can be fun. I know for me, when I first auditioned for the first play I ever did in high school, I had no idea what theater was, didn't know I was any good at it, didn't know anything. And I learned how much I enjoyed being on stage in front of an audience. That's my home away from home. Being on stage in front of a crowd, I love it. I eat it up. I'm at my best right there. But rehearsals can be just as fun, because you're giving up valuable time, your time, to get the show ready. Well, rehearsals need to be fun, and they can be. But you're never going to know until you try. So you want to be in theater to have that escape. Also, you'll make friends that can last a lifetime. I've made theater friends that I would never have met otherwise. We have nothing in common aside from our love of theater. And I met them doing a show, and we are still good friends today. So you can make lifelong friends that you never would have made just by doing theater. And there you go. So you do theater because you can get entertained. You can do theater because you can make lifelong friendships. And you do theater because you can make the world a better place. Because you are part of that wheel, that cog. You're that cog in the wheel, that you make the world better because you're helping the whole, the play itself. You're helping the theater offer an escape, people that come to see whatever show you're in, they're getting an escape. They're able to sit there for 2 hours and forget life. Why? Because you made that happen. You and all the other actors and the director and whoever's in charge of lights and sound and backstage, all of that came together and they're giving an escape. And you can say, I'm part of that. And that's why you need to be in theater. So now you're saying, okay, good arguments, but I've never done theater. Neither did I. I don't know if I'm going to get at it. Neither did I. And you say, well, I don't know if it's something I want to do. Well, you're never going to know until you try. Never say never. And you say, well, I don't think that I'm an actor. Well, you never know, right? I've said that. And let's remember that even the best actors, all the Tom Hanks in the world, multiple Oscars, he had to start somewhere. I don't think he came out of the womb, as an actor. He had to start, whether it's in elementary school or high school or wherever. Now, some people from the earliest memories, they just knew, I'm an actor, I'm a singer, I'm whatever. But people like me, I didn't know that. Now, I knew that I was an entertainer. And in one sense, I was always entertaining. And I was making people laugh. Now, at the time, I didn't know why. I just knew that I just knew that I liked making people laugh. I like making people have a good time. But once I started doing theater, it began over time. It finally sank in. I like entertaining. I like making the world better. I like making people forget life for a little bit with a smile, with a laugh. But I didn't know that. Wouldn't have known that if I hadn't have done theater. And so maybe Tom Hanks knew he wanted to do acting from an early age. Maybe he discovered it later. The point is, he did it. Now, I'm not saying you could be the next Tom Hanks, but maybe you could be. I don't know. All I'm saying is give it a shot. And if you're not on stage, you could be backstage. Because like I've said earlier, you've got to have people that are handling lights and handling sound and handling backstage stuff like props and sets and costumes. There's so many things that are involved in making a community theater show work. That even if you are not an actor, you can find a place to plug in and you can be a part of making the world a better place. All you have to do is show up. And so maybe you're thinking, well, yeah, but there's no theater where I live. Well, that can be a problem. And that's where use the internet and see what theaters are close. Is there anything close to you? And if there is, you can plug in. I know someone that drives an hour to do theater because he loves theater. He wants to make the world a better place. He wants that escape. He wants that. And he gets that. He sacrifices the hour drive there and hour drive back. But it's worth it because of what he gets out of it. And we think it's worth it because we get him. And if you don't have a theater near where you live, and there's not one where you live, of course, well, that doesn't mean that you can't make one happen. Before I got into theater here where I live, there was a group that did children's theater for kids, by kids. They wanted kids on stage, and they wanted kids to come see the shows too. Trouble was, they didn't have a theater. So what'd they do? How'd they make it work? They used wherever they could find. They would, whether it was elementary schools, junior high schools, high schools, churches, any place that had a stage, they would go and work and see what it would take to get the play there. I know another theater, they too didn't have one. They did have a local theater where they lived, but it wasn't theirs. They didn't own it. They couldn't afford to buy it. So what they would do is they would come in like the day before they would do the show, and they would rent the theater for from then, how long it would take for them, like the 2 or 3 performances, whatever they were doing. They would rent the theater and then they'd come in. And then you say, well, how can you get a show put up and all that in less than a day? Well, they would do it. And it works because they wanted theater to happen. So what I'm saying to you is, if you want it to happen, it can. Just find people that are like you, that if you find that you love theater, well, there you go. Get together, make yourself a group, and then work on getting the ball rolling. And once you have all the things in place, then you can look at doing a play, getting the actors, the director, all that, and then a place to perform it. I kind of get a little sidetracked here, but we'll move back because we're talking about the audition process. If you were, saying that if you didn't think you were an actor, you could work backstage. Well, what if you are an actor or you want to try? You want to see if you are? Well, what I would do is when you see that there's an audition somewhere where you live or near where you live, the next thing I would do is look that play up on the internet, because they're probably, especially if you're new to theater, you probably haven't heard of the play. You don't know what it is. I've been in theater over 30 years, and there's still plays that I have never seen before. And the first thing I'll do is I'll go look it up online. Now, many times the audition information, whether it's online or it's in your local paper or whatever, it may tell you a synopsis, give you the story, and it may give you characters and a description of them, but it may not. And if it doesn't do that, that's when you can go to the internet and you can find out information about the show. And at the same time, you might even find clips on YouTube from a production somewhere. And in some rare cases, you might even find a full production of the show. Now, I'm not going to say how copyright works or doesn't work here, but I have found shows on YouTube that I wanted to see that was like the full show. And it happens because here's the thing. You are going to be coming into this and you may have next to no knowledge. So whatever info you can get, it's only going to help you. And even if you don't get any kind of video footage, just knowing who the characters are and their age ranges and their personality, that can help you decide if that's something you want to audition for. Because, for example, the first audition I went to, I never heard of the show before. And I just said, well, I picked this one because it had a lot of lines. That's the one I want. Now, I did not realize at the time that particular character was supposed to be, late 20s, early 30s. And I was 18, but I looked like I was 14. And I mentioned this in the pilot episode, And there's no way that I would get cast in that role when there were other actors that were equal, if not better than me, that were also in the age range that the director wanted. So you can save yourself a lot of trouble, a lot of headaches and heartaches if you audition for stuff that fits who you are and like your age and what you look like. So if you look really young, then you'll know that an older part may not work for me. Now, in community theater, because it's community-based, like we said, it's pretty much, you got to go with what you got to go with. And maybe the persons who audition don't fit specifically what the script calls for. Well, the director will use what he has available. So that's always, that's something that you'll learn. I have done shows where it's supposed to be a person in their mid to late 50s. But the actress that was cast was in the early 40s. Why? Because the right aged person that had the skill set that was required for the role just didn't audition. And this one did, and it worked fine. So don't let that throw you either. Just, if you can have more information, that's always better. Now, as to the audition itself, keep in mind what I said earlier about, even Tom Hanks had to start somewhere. And that's true. Every person in that room on some level, is probably a little nervous, a little on edge. No matter how many auditions you do, and I'll say this, no matter how many auditions I do, I still get nervous, especially if it's a show that I've never done before, because I'm reading the script cold for the first time. I'm auditioning just like everyone else, and I don't know what the director wants. I may look at the script and it says I'm auditioning for someone and gives an age and says, well, he's an old man who is just fed up with life. And then I have to try to decide, okay, how do I think this old man who is totally, upset with his life, what would I do? And then I have to come up with, how would I portray that on stage? And I probably only have a handful of minutes to do that. It might be that I'm going to say that I didn't have auditions in my day and really liked it. I don't like anybody telling me what to do. That's why I ain't going to the home. Yeah, that's just an example of an old man, and that's the thing. Everyone else in that room, they're also having to think on the fly. How do I want to do this? How do I want to do that? And the directors may even want you to read something that you totally didn't think about reading for. You may look at the audition sheet, and you may look at if you got the characters beforehand. You may say, I want to audition for this, this, and this. Or maybe just one. Whatever it is, they may say, why don't you read for this too? And you may even be more nervous because, oh no, I didn't prepare for that. But that's okay. Because everyone else in that room, I guarantee it, there are some level of nervousness about them. Because it's an audition. That's just what it is. So you just take a deep breath, and you get through it. And you realize that this is community theater, and everyone is an amateur in there. At least the phrase I like to use, experience admired but not required. Now then, let's say you get that part and you're into learning lines. Learning lines is horrible because for me, I do not read, okay? I should, but I just never. Now, my brother is probably reading 20 books at any one time. And I'm lucky to read one book every few years. And that's no lie. I just don't read. So when it comes to learning lines, that's an issue because you have to read your script to learn your lines. Now, what I do is I learn a lot of my lines at rehearsal. Because at rehearsal, typically what's going to happen is they're going to get a scene, they're going to block it, which is where they tell you where to stand, when, and how to move, and all of that. And then you're going to run through that, probably multiple times. And just that multiple repetition, I'm getting the lines, because, you're going to be reading. And I want to encourage you, though, that as you're doing it, you need to learn your lines fast. Because having that script in your hand, that is an actor's biggest nemesis right there. Because when you've got your book, you're constantly looking inside it. And you're like, okay, now what page? Now where's my line? And I got to make sure I say it right. And I got to make sure I don't get lost. And you've got all these things running through your head. So it's really difficult for you to focus on acting because I'm trying to keep my place. I'm trying to keep, my lines. I'm trying to, all these things concerned to that book. But when you finally have your lines learned, it's totally a whole new world. Acting will completely open up and you will see everything in a whole new light once you get the book out of your hand. Because then you can fully, completely, 100% begin to act. And you say, well, okay, how do I do it? I mean, I get it. You learn lines when you're running through things, but if you want me to learn them fast, well, The old-fashioned way is to just read and reread and reread. You read a line, and then you repeat it to yourself. Now, a lot of people, they will get a partner, whether it's a brother, a sister, a husband, a wife, someone, a friend, and they'll say, would you read lines with me? And they can have an extra copy of the script or whatever lines they want. And then the partner will read off of them, and you'll just read back and forth as you're they'll have the script, and you'll have, and you'll just recite the lines and try to remember them. And you may have a script and give them copies so that you can only look if you really get stuck or something like that. But that's what a lot of people do. Another popular thing that I do sometimes is I will write my lines or type them. If you take your lines and if you write them out in a book, like a spiral notebook or some kind of pad, or in the modern vernacular, you can type them out on your computer through WordPad or whatever you use. Type them out, and I would do it 5 times. Like if it's a scene, and you want to remember like this whole scene, I would type that scene out 5 times. Just type out, and by that, just your dialogue only. Don't type anything else but your words. And if it's a monologue, then you just type out the entire monologue. Do it 5 times. Or do it in sections if it's a big one. Do chunks. So type out your monologue and if it's a big scene, again, chunks. But just type out that and then do it. That. And then once you do 5 times, try to read it, try to recite it. And if you have to, read it back. But then do it again. Type it 5 times, write it 5 times, whichever you prefer, and then recite it back. And then you keep doing that over and over, and eventually you're going to remember it. And that's another one that's not that good. It's easy to do. It can be boring and repetitious because it is, but that's a good way to get your lines down. And blocking, remember what we said, that's where the director will tell you where to stand and where to move and when to do all that. Well, that just make sure when you're at rehearsal, you have a pencil. And when he tells you, I want you to move over here and then say that line. I want you to do this before you say it, or do this as you're saying, whatever he tells you, write it down in the margins with a pencil. And use a pencil because that could change. After watching, the director may change his mind and say, well, I like this better, or let's try this. Then you can simply erase, write down the new, and then boom, move on to the next thing. So that's always good, is to have a pencil handy. Now, let's talk about character development. Now, this comes in when you have to play a particular character and you want to do more than just get up there and read the lines. And that comes in, and we'll use Charlotte's Web as an example. And because that's the show I'm currently doing. And let's look at Templeton the Rat. Now, I had the joy and honor of playing Templeton the Rat multiple times in this production over the years. And if you look at Templeton, well, he's a rat. But what else is there about Templeton? Well, if you know the story of Charlotte's Web, you have that Templeton is, well, he's kind of arrogant. He's kind of egotistical. He's kind of self-centered. He's kind of selfish. I mean, all these negative things. And that's him. And so, but why is he that way? Think about it, and maybe dive deep in your head. And even though I don't know what E.B. White did, who wrote the original story, but think about, well, why is Templeton so arrogant and egotistical and self-centered and selfish? Why is it all about me? And what makes him be that way? And come up with a backstory of why he is what he is. Maybe he's had to fend for himself until he got to the farm. And he's not used to having friends. He's not used to having others who look out for him and he looks out for others. I mean, there's so many things you could do, but just think about that in your head. Why is Templeton the way he is? And then when you're saying the Templeton lines, well, you've got to think about who he is while you're saying the lines to develop the character. Like when you first meet Templeton, the goose says, Wilbur asks, well, who is that? And the goose says, Templeton the rat. And then Templeton says, in person? Though it won't be nice to have a pig around the place again. I haven't had delicious leftover slops in an age. Well, see, right there. That dialogue says that he's proud to be Templeton the rat. So he's in person. And then he tells the goose and the gander and Wilbur how, it's going to be nice to have a pig because he plans on eating Wilbur's food. And so when you're saying those lines, you want him to be very matter of fact in person. And you want him to be, very like, I'm going to get your food, very sure of himself, and very like, I'm proud, and just let him, and all of these type of things you can think about, and as you're developing the characters, and that's what you do, you develop a backstory, because the idea as an actor is you're not playing, even though we say the character Templeton the rat. Really what you want to do is you want to look at Templeton as a real living, breathing creature, because he's not really a human being. You want to look at him as real. You're not playing Templeton. You are. So don't play the character, become the character. You may have heard something similar to that with what they call method acting. But you don't have to get that totally engrossed in method acting to make this work. You just think about who the character, you think about who this is, who Templeton is. Or even in the case of Wilbur, who is Wilbur? Well, we know that Wilbur is a little pig who was saved from being killed by Fern, his owner, who begged and pleaded with her dad, please don't kill him. It's not his fault that he's a runt, that he's small. And the dad says, okay, you can take care of him, but eventually I can only do so much because it takes money to take care of pigs. And ultimately he ends up going to stay with Uncle Homer, Fern's uncle. But when he gets there, he doesn't have any friends because he's brand new. And so he's lonely. And he's only known the life with Fern and her family. And now he's kind of fending for himself outside of being fed by the farmer. So there's lots of things you can think about as you're developing who this person or this creature, in the case of Wilbur, who this character, even though we said we want to become, not, but that's kind of how that works. So I hope that I've given you some good insight into the art of theater. And maybe if you have never considered theater, you will. And if you have considered theater and you've acted before, maybe something in here triggered that will help you as you do more. And as we always like to do on these podcasts, I want to thank Daybreak Digital Studios, who are the audio editors for this podcast, because they have the tools to make you sound like $1 million. You don't think I sound like this in real life, do you? So if you have any audio editing and you need it done efficiently, and you need it done in a timely manner, then DaybreakDigitalStudios.com, that's where you go. So you visit them and you will not be disappointed. And if they can't do it, they know the professionals that can. And I also want to encourage you to please, as I've said many times on this podcast, watch Steve Trash Science. That's the science and magic show for kids on PBS in the United States. It's got science and magic and music and learning and puppets and fun. And I'm the puppeteer for the show. And if you Google on your favorite device, Steve Trash Science, you will find the show on pbs.org, the main website for PBS in America. And you can watch the first 10 episodes of Season 1. Now, Season 2 hopefully is on the horizon, but the wheels don't turn without money to burn. So if you are listening to this podcast and you've seen Steve Trash and you love the show, then all you need to do is donate money. Don't worry, if you don't have money to donate, that's fine. But if you do, it's tax deductible. Or maybe someone out there knows a corporate sponsor who has plenty of money, who wants to find a very good show to get behind. Because let me tell you, the likes of Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, all of these classic shows from PBS, they had to start somewhere. And now, shows like Sesame Street have major funding, but they didn't always have the money. And that's what we want with Steve Trash Science. We want major funding, not because we want to get rich, because you won't, but because we want to provide you the best quality children and family entertainment possible. And we can do that if we get the proper funding. And we can do more than just 10 episodes a season. And we can do more with our magic and our science, music, learning, and fun. And we can do more with puppets. But it's going to take you. And I want to thank you if you've watched the show. Thank you for donating. And even if you haven't, watch the show. Maybe you'll change your mind. And last but by no means least, I hope that this podcast is giving you something positive, because that's the whole reason why the podcast exists. We're here for you. And if you have a suggestion, an idea, a comment, drop us a line, MRPUPPT. That's Mr. Puppet without the E at gmail.com. Let us know what you think, how you're doing, what you would like to hear. We're here for you. And as I always say each and every podcast, never goodbye, always good journey.